there's a way to connect with people where you are really honoring that they have something to give you, right? There's a way to look at somebody and go, I'm never going to have access to behind your eyes. I'm never going to have access to your experience and your everything. And so when you're sharing that with me, that can be really divine.
Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Hey, welcome to the Rob Scott Show. I am here with Sarah. Sarah, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Rob. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really great. I'm excited to do this with you. What should we talk about today?
Well, I think something that might be very helpful for our listeners today was talking about ways that we can communicate with one another better.
Okay.
And I think that goes along with, just ways that we can improve ourselves and have more success in our work and in our business. But specifically, I think of communication. There's many parts of communication, but the one that I thought might be helpful and useful to talk about today is the idea of listening skills.
Mm-hmm.
How to be a better active listener.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Yeah, for sure. Let's back up to communication for a second, because I think you and I were briefly talking about this, and I like just being obvious about it and breaking it down, that there are parts of communication which are speaking well and clearly and, in a way that can be received. And then there's the listening side of that, and being able to switch and do both of those, right? Seems important to understand. Do you think that people speak well to one another? Generally, like, do you think?
I don't.
Yeah,
I don't. And I guess from my own experience, I think often I'm communicating something very well, and then I'm surprised when there's a miscommunication. So I think that many of us are under the assumption, because we hear what's going on in our own head, that we're communicating it clearly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's always the case. And I think that's why a large part of what I get talked about in communication, or that I hear about, is how to express yourself and how to kind of relate, and body language and eye contact and that kind of thing. But I do think there's another important part, which is the other side, is how to listen to what somebody's saying to you.
Yeah, there's all that.
Simple. It's not.
No, but there's the whole thing about, like, communicate through story and be more compelling and charming. Right, and you're right, that gets a lot of attention. So let me ask you one other question before we really dive in on this. Do you think that there's a bigger problem with speaking or with listening in communicating?
I think listening. I think there's many platforms to speak on, and I think that we have options of where we can feel comfortable expressing our voice. And I think across the board, there's not enough training or attention or useful tips on how to be better listeners to other people.
Love that. And so obviously active listening is a thing. Have you heard that somewhere? Where's that phrasing coming from?
Yeah, so I read this book written by a therapist who lives in San Francisco, and part of that book it was a book about how to be mindfully connected to other people, and one of them was kind of digging through the different ways that we can be active listeners and how there's listening blocks that we often bump into. And I was surprised, as someone who thought, I'm a great listener. I've been told I'm a great listener. I was like, I do all of these things.
Yeah.
And I was like, maybe I'm not a great listener.
What kinds of things were they talking about?
So one of them was like anticipating what somebody was going to say while they're saying it and what your response was going to be.
Yeah.
Which maybe is a sign of, I don't know, emotional intelligence or following a conversation. But often what we talk about, or what you talk about in the business, is being present in the now. And so when you're listening to somebody share something with you and you're dialoguing it in your head, or guessing what they're going to say, or trying to rehearse what you're going to say before they're finished, I realized the nuance of that is you're taking yourself out of that moment.
Yeah, it's the opposite of being present. Right? So if presence is being with what is, and not being present is being like lost in thought or imagination, right? So we're focused on a future that's not here yet, or we're in the past regretting something, or we're just imagining things. All of that is away from sensation and presence, right?
Right.
And so in the act of listening, by the way, it is a sign of intelligence to model what someone's saying, get there faster, be able to quickly respond, like all that stuff. So obviously ideation is a part of that, right? And if they're inviting you through a story to imagine things, they're going to be taking you into imagination if you're present with them and all that. But if we're leaving what they're saying so that we can be strategizing or thinking through something or really working to get our agenda, right? It's really funny to me that so much of communication is really a sales process. And I don't mean that you're actually selling something for money, but you're trying to convince, you're trying to share a truth, you're trying to be persuasive in some way, right? So it is like a sales exchange, right? Of, I believe this is what I like, this is what happened. Like you're convincing and proving. And if we're not capable of listening, like when someone else is talking, putting down our stuff and really receiving what they have, it's the least mindful thing that we could be doing, right? We're doing exactly what in the rest of our life where we're not being mindful, we're carrying that into a conversation. And it really is a great place. And I know there's also tons to learn, even though there's tons of training about in the speaking space, right? There's not,
sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think it's only a problem with listening. There's also, we're not very clear. We think we're clearer than we are. We don't really consider other people enough when we're communicating, all that kind of stuff in the speaking side of it. But I might agree with you that most of it is that half of the people that we're talking to aren't listening at all. And I mean, in a bigger sense, businesses aren't listening, right? People are talking back at social media, and it's the wonderful enlightened business that's actually listening to like what that crowd is saying or whatever, right? So, you know, individually with the people that we love, we're tuning out and we're hearing like Charlie Brown's teacher talking at us while we're either completely not paying attention or we're strategizing or we're doing anything else. Do any other strategies come up that you remember from the book?
Well, what took me off guard is there's the obvious not listening, right? When you're talking to someone and maybe they're looking down at their phone or they're looking away or they're multitasking, or you know, maybe you've been on the phone with somebody and you can tell, you're like, what are you doing? Like, are you? Yeah. So there's the obvious ways, but these that were detailed were so subtle. And they weren't necessarily, I know we don't really put bad or good on many things, but they weren't malicious. They weren't overtly selfish. They weren't, but it was just kind of like, oh yeah, this is what your brain, we talk about mindset and managing your mind, and oh, this is what your brain starts to do when it hears something that either it's excited about or it's challenged on, and then you start kind of a tip of not being able to manage your mind, manage your thoughts. And then you start, I really want to speak up. Especially you talked about social media. If you're reading something or reading a post or listening to a podcast or whatnot, often we hear something and we instantly are like, I want to respond to that. And then it stops us from hearing the full, maybe that person's not done quote unquote speaking, but we've already left it. And so I love the example of like a podcast, right? You can hear something in a podcast that will remind you of something important in your own business or whatever. And now the podcast is playing, you've stopped listening. You're looking for your phone to like write a note or an email to yourself or something. And then you're coming in and you're realizing, oh, I wasn't paying attention during any of that. And of course, none of that is bad. If it's important to capture a thought when it occurs, you might need to do that. You don't have to listen all the time, right? None of this is like, be a better listener. But if we're not in control of that at all, it ends up resembling, you know, ADD or something, right? It just feels like we're scattered and all over the place, and we're losing our ability to focus and be present with any of it, right? With any of it. And so what I love about this is that this is really one place that even if you don't want to have like a meditation or a mindfulness practice of any kind, you're going to be listening to things at times, right? Like how present can you be when a song is playing on the radio through the whole song? Like, can you actually just be with it and be present? That's a form of mindfulness, right? You're putting your mind on sound and you're doing your best to leave it there without skittering about into thought. But what a respectful and loving way to show up for people in your life, employees, employers, your partner, your kids, your parents, whoever. If you can actually be there really receiving them, you know, there's a deep emotional connection when somebody feels really heard and connected to. And I think it's one of the biggest problems in our relationships is people don't feel heard. They don't feel like they matter and like they're valued because, oh, I'm busy and, you know, do we have to go over this now? And even when there is time, I'm talking over you and I'm not listening and there's really no exchange. It's just like an agenda being thrown at you. And we end up feeling beat up and not connected. We feel lonely, right? And it's pretty horrible. So how can we actually learn to be mindful in our listening and really, really be present? I think that's really powerful. Well, and I thought that was ironic because I thought, wow, most people want their voice to be heard, and they want to say their truth and speak their truth, and of course we do. But then we lack the ability at times to hear other people's voice. So how do we say, hey, I want you guys to hear my voice, if we can't really knowingly listen? And then kind of zooming out from just like a you and I conversation or a one-on-one conversation, for our listeners that may be entrepreneurs or working in businesses, to your point, you know, on a larger scale, like how can you listen better to your community, to your tribe, to your clients, I mean, that listening goes such a long way. And it's it just often, I feel like, doesn't get the attention that it could. And I just thought, wow, what an awesome tip if we could give some kind of mindful ways to be better listeners, or to kind of run our brains better when we're in a listening state versus a speaking state.
Yeah, totally. There's a way to connect with people where you are really honoring that they have something to give you, right? There's a way to look at somebody and go, I'm never going to have access to behind your eyes. I'm never going to have access to your experience and your everything. And so when you're sharing that with me, that can be really divine, right? That can be like really special. And I think that if we kind of insist in our own life that we want to interact in our most precious relationships at that level, if that's not happening, that's a good, vector for us to make some decisions about, like, how much do I want to spend my time with this person, right? If you're with a friend and all they do is like take the air out of the room because they're talking and they can't ever listen to you, right? You don't feel heard, and then you're not interested, or it's not easy for you to kind of sit in and really hear them and really let them share themselves. Like, this is it's almost like a bearing of intimacy. Like, how intimate can you be with somebody else? And part of that is sharing yourself and feeling received and heard. I've been in a relationship where we went in to do work on the relationship, and we were introduced to something that I had heard of it before. I think my partner at the time had not heard of it before. And it's just called mirroring, right? Where, and often this is done like with a therapist or with a third person there to kind of judge or help or hold, but it's a fantastic, like, it's in books that you can go learn how to do this. And essentially, the process is, I'm going to sit and I'm going to share something with you about literally anything. And then your job is, without adding any extra to it at all, just saying back what you heard me say, right? And so very high level of communication, you would be able to do that, even though it may not be what you want to do, because you want to, in the moment, especially in front of a therapist or something, if you're having a problem in your relationship,
right,
you want to show where the other person's wrong or whatever, but it's actually just an exercise. Like, can you just hear the information and then say back, to a great degree of accuracy, what you heard? That's for some people, it's incredibly hard to do. And the person I was dating at the time, even with like direct coaching in the moment, just could not escape interpreting and then speaking back new meaning on top of it, instead of just, no, this is what Rob was trying to convey to you. Did you hear what he was trying to convey? I'd like to think that I was pretty good at it, but who knows, right? Like, that's my perspective, and she might not have felt like I was good at it. But what I want to talk about is that if we could insist in our life to have more of the kind of relating where, even if you're being critical of me, that it's really, I just want to take it as information. Like, it doesn't have to be an attack against me. It doesn't have to mean that you don't like me or whatever. You're really just speaking into, hey, this moment hurt, or that made me feel unsafe, or I didn't really trust you when you did that, or whatever. And I get to go, oh, and you and I can learn and grow from that, right? Because we've had this intimate communication where everything is safe to say, and I'm really going to be a vessel. I'm really going to be a vessel for the listening of whatever you have to be radically honest about, right? Brad Blanton in his work on radical honesty is really speaking into the moment and putting down the protective interpretation. Like that's a lot of the problem with the speaking side, is that we're not really speaking our truth half the time, right? If I could switch gears over to that really fast.
Right.
We end up in our relationships being really polite with each other. And polite is another form of stuffing resentments down and not really telling you like where I'm unhappy or where I'm hurting, because I maybe want to keep you happy, or it'll be, if we get into it now, it's going to be too exhausting tonight. So I don't speak into what really bothers me or whatever. And so my speaking isn't authentic or mindful or honest or any of that. And then you can feel that even though it might not be conscious, but you know that like some separation is happening, some resentments are building up. And so what are you going to, you're not really listening then because I'm just telling you the party line.
Right.
I'm just telling you the party line that's going to just get us through the night. Like, okay, is it great? Like, fantastic. And it's not really fantastic. When in reality, people don't realize that if you can be courageous enough to hear my hurt and my unhappy, once I get to share that, I feel amazing because I really feel seen and heard. I get to be truthful and honest and really who I am. And you get to really hear information that if we're strong enough to know we're going to live through it, that you can get good information about like, oh, that's really what you'd like me to be or whatever. Like that is okay with me or it's not okay with me. But it's so much more like real and honest and powerful if we can do that, like really get to that real communication. That's where intimacy or, you know, the joke about into me see, right? I'm actually sharing my real reality with you to be intimate. And if you're not capable of hearing that because you can't be mindful or you're selfish or you're strategizing how to win the argument or whatever's going on there, we're going to have a breakdown there. But if you can really receive it and then you get to have your experience with it and share that back honestly with me. And if I can receive it, now we're communicating at some of the highest level that we're capable of. I mean, like that's the way to get down, if that makes sense.
Definitely. No, it does. And I love it because it almost suggests it, you know, listening and speaking, it's almost a chicken and the egg, but it does. It's just another different angle to look at it, that if you can be a really good and mindful and present listener, that by default is going to probably also help you in your speaking communication.
For sure.
As well.
Can we live a life where the adults around us are allowed to be who they are? And I don't expect them to love and like everything about me. I hope they don't expect me to love and like everything about them. I'm going to have critiques. I'm going to have thoughts. And if we can honestly get at those and, you know, from a heart-filled place, like not be so gentle, like your words are violence against me. It's like, all right, settle down. Maybe not. Like maybe violence is violent. And these are words. I'm sharing myself with you and we're going to have to get through some of this stuff. So I think that's really powerful to be more honest in our speaking and be more present in our listening.
For sure.
Might be the shortcut there that would be really helpful.
And also kind of another way to look at it, right? So it's obviously somewhat difficult to hear constructive criticism or hear things that we disagree with or things that we don't like. We also really like to share different self-care, self-love tips. The other side is I think that being an active listener, when somebody's saying something in a complimentary way or in a nice way or saying something kind to you, which hopefully happens as much as the other, but you know, it often doesn't. I think that being a present listener there and being able to receive is a way to kind of grow in self-love. And I find for myself that it's something that I realize that I'm not very good at receiving. Yeah. And I've heard other people that you've worked with and have been through our programs, you know, say, the same thing. Yeah. So, for example, if someone says something really awesome and complimentary to you, I don't know about you, but my instinct is to say, oh, well, that's because, you know, to write it off or to downplay it or to flip it. And that's another kind of a nuance of, is that really me listening? Or was that me like, you know, I don't like the attention on me. I don't know how to receive it. I'm going to deflect it. These kind of subtle things that we do, probably most of us without even realizing that we're doing it. But there's another side too, when somebody says something kind.
So I love that. I need to jump on this because I'm going in like 4 directions with it. And I want to see if I can put it together. The thesis is that I don't think we're as good at soaking up the subtle little goodies that we're given, right? There's such an advantage, we think, and sometimes there is, of being self-critical that we will rush after downplaying something. We get, you know, virtue signaling points for being humble. We do all these things. But in those moments where you really do get a genuine compliment, like, can you sit in that and own that and really soak it up? Similar to how I talk about like Thich Nhat Hanh and the orange way, right? Many of us are like gobbling the orange, and yes, we like it, and yes, we think it's delicious. We would judge it really high on that. That's a pretty tasty thing for sure. But Thich Nhat Hanh is hanging out with like a quarter wedge of an orange for like a half an hour and just literally letting every little bit of flavor soak in, right? And I talk about this all the time. But that difference in like how much wealth was there in the orange that I'm flying right past, or you might be flying right past, just to get to the next one and go, God, that's not enough orange, or now I've had too much orange, and now the next thing and the next thing. this guy's being present with what is and the beauty of it that's like really, really subtle. Another one, just to make it creepy. I was talking to a buddy and somebody was like flirting with him or whatever. And he was talking about it like it was like, oh, like I can't have that. Right. And don't get into it. Like maybe he could have it or whatever, but there was this desire to have more in that moment. Right. And what's being missed there is that like when you're flirting and when someone's finding you attractive, like that alone is like a really beautiful little experience. But what do? We fly right past it to, I want the whole thing. I want to get into bed with that person, or I want that person's full devotion, or like just the beginning of the flirting and the little look in the eyes can be really rich, right? That could be like a poem for your day of just to like experience that little bit. So like when you get a compliment, when somebody's flirting with you, when you're eating an orange, like there's all these little beautiful things that we are missing because we're not present, because we're not listening, right? And that's a form of listening also, not just to words and ideas, but to your own sensations and your own emotions. Like, are you listening for the little bits of joy that make you laugh, right? Like I often will have a joke going in my head and I'll be in an elevator and I'll like chuckle to myself. And I really try to draw that out in my own subjective experience of joy because it's like something was really funny. And so I want to hang out with that. I want to cultivate and protect that wealth, right? That beautiful, like that's really what I think of as wealth. It's not some number random in your account that it may be some sense of security or whatever. Of course, that's also wealthy, but it's the joy. It's that real like poem of life that we get to wring as much out of as we possibly can. And, some of it's even in the sadness, some of the real richness in that or whatever is another sense of wealth. So anyway, now that I've taken that in 15 directions, I just think
I loved it. That's great.
There's a real quality of listening to the world, life, not trying to fly and be somewhere else, not to impose our will on it, but to receive instead, right? And I don't know if you want to go down this rabbit hole, but the difference between talking and listening and like prayer and meditation and those things, I talk about that sometimes. Is that clear?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I definitely.
Yeah, I think that, if we're going to interact with the all in some sense, and some people might call that God or universe or the not us or whatever, that act of praying, whether you're asking for stuff or whether you're being thankful or whatever, that's really of the part of the conversation. That's the talking part, right? That's the talking part. And meditation is really the listening part, right? Meditation is, I'm not sitting down to say anything. I'm actually sitting down to listen. I'm actually trying to not speak in my thoughts, right? My thoughts are another way to kind of talk, right? To make noise in the ether. And so instead of that, I'm actually trying to feel sensation. I'm trying to listen to my body sensation, to my emotional texture. If I am thinking, I want to listen to that thought, but detach from it and let it go, right? And so I really think of like prayer as talking and meditation as listening, and they're both important, right? They both matter in how we're doing this. They both can be revered and all that stuff. But what I think we're not as good at, as you sort of inferred in the beginning, just in conversation, we might not be as good at listening, right? We might not be as good at listening. There's problems in how we talk. I don't think we're authentic all the time. I don't think often we may not be, if we're praying, we may not be praying about the right things, whatever. But I think as a whole, we could learn to listen more mindfully, and that would go a long way.
Well, and as we are trying to dish out kind of easy mindset hacks or something, this is just another area where you might be able to see some improvement with yourself. And it's just something that I've just noticed a lot lately, even on phone conversations, say with my mom or something. We'll talk about a whole bunch of stuff. At the end, it's, bye, I love you, or bye, the great comment, glad we got to talk, whatever, that little kind of the goodness, that little nugget, the slice of the orange. It's at the very end, and it's after a whole bunch of things. And by the time you're ready to hang up on the phone, your mind's already, well, I got to go to this and I got to do that. And I just, it's when you're entering a state of mindfulness in, like we talked about meditation or different gratitude, that kind of thing before, it's easier to say, hey, mind, slow down, be here. But I've noticed like, oh, that's a skill that I don't have in the listening side. And so I think that, how much more connection and joy and presence would I be able to feel if I could bring that into the listening, even non-maliciously. Like when I think I'm listening, if I'm catching my brain countering it or excusing a compliment or debating a constructive criticism, that's my mind going without my permission.
Yeah.
So this is just another way to kind of strengthen that mindfulness muscle.
And it's not like you're not going to think in conversation ever, but you can tell the difference, right? You can tell like, they're still talking and I'm not really paying attention anymore. Mm-hmm. And so the shortcut here is not at all to shame yourself about that, right? It's not to make this decision to try to change and then notice how bad you are at it, right? It's actually the move is to use it as an alert to make it okay to be present, right? And I'll use another totally different context, right? Like when we're driving and we found traffic is going to make us late or whatever, we can suffer through that lateness because we're not where we're supposed to be, quote unquote, right? Or we can just be like, no, I wanted to be somewhere else, but now I'm where I'm supposed to be. Like traffic is where I'm supposed to be. So how can I, actually give myself permission to be where I am or to be late in that context, right? And so when you're noticing yourself in your thought going, oh, I'm doing it again, make it okay that it was happening, but then bring it back, right? And just bring it back. And then also make it okay to be present, right? Sometimes it feels like, I'm supposed to be out of this conversation to be somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. To whatever degree you can, like, all right, my dad called. I wasn't expecting to speak to him. I've got some work things I thought I'd be doing, but he needs 5 or 10 minutes of my time. I'm not going to let it go endlessly, but like I'm going to be present with him for the next 5 or 10 minutes, right? And then just make that okay. And then you're just there practicing like, how can I listen to my dad right now? What's going on with that? Like, okay, bring it, right? And now I've really blessed I've made it something that's a little bit more divine or special, or I'm really where I'm supposed to be. I can ground myself right here. And I'm not doing that dance of like, this isn't it. I'm not supposed to be in this. We're supposed to be finished by now. Like it's supposed to. I can put all that down and really just be present and then play that game of like, okay, am I really hearing him? What's going on here? Right.
And look for getting it back, because the better you are at listening, and receiving, the better other people are going to mirror that to you.
Hold the people in your life to a little bit higher standard, ask for it. Say, hey, I really want you to listen for me. And I think that helps. People that aren't very good at this, it's like, hey, can we sit down and like not have the TV on? Like, I really want you to listen to this. And then you get to really share yourself. And it doesn't mean that you're super eloquent or you know exactly what to say, but it's closer to, in the speaking part, it's closer to, hey, I'm not sure what to say. I can feel that I'm a little anxious right now and I'm really trying to get you to understand something. And I'm not sure how to best say it, but I'll do my best. And here's my try. And, and it's just that authentic sharing of what's real for you and what you're trying to do.
Yes. Authenticity. That's great.
It's like good communication is not perfect communication. It's honest and authentic communication, right? It's really just doing your best with it, because we're all dealing in the complexity and the mess and the three
overwhelm. Well,
the 5 selves that we are, right? There's the self I want to be, and there's the self I think I am. There's the self I'm scared of being, and there's the self that, there's all of those that are competing and trying to show up and share myself with somebody. And so the more we can be confidently messy in who we are and just authentically share that, that's intimacy, right? That's sharing intimately. But that requires somebody on the other end actually listening. And so, be that listener, invite that listening in others, speak honestly and authentically.
And I'll say that. I'll either say, oh, I need a minute. I'll have to think about that. I'm not really sure what to say. Like, I won't pretend that I know all the responses to everything. Or likewise, if I get distracted, it happens. And I'll be like, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Or I'll just say, I did not listen to that. Can you say that again? Or something. That's you said it perfectly. It's not, good communication isn't perfect communication, it's honest communication. Mm-hmm. So that's another great tip I think people could take away from that.
Good.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, I think that's good for today. You guys are amazing. We super appreciate you. If you want, there is a really killer training called The Fundamental Shift at fundamentalshift.com. And go check that out if you want to go get some real good mindset training. Sarah, I
You
appreciate
can also find us on iTunes and YouTube and Facebook. So you can go ahead and like and subscribe and review if that's what you're into. But we really always appreciate hearing from you guys.
Yeah, we actually love that. And you know what? We want to start answering questions from you guys. So I'm not sure where to send them. But soon we'll come up with a place to point people to so that you guys can ask questions, and we'll shout you out on the show if you put a question, and we'll do our best to answer everything. Appreciate this time with you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. We'll talk to you really soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.